Hello and welcome. Put this down and get this up and we'll get started. Alright, so this time we are going to learn about students as learners, their development, their learning process, their diversity, motivation, and learning environment. The first person we're going to talk about is Maslow. So Maslow noticed when he worked with monkeys that some needs took precedence over others. So if they had a monkey that was both hungry and thirsty, and he put food and water in front of that monkey, the monkey would first go to the water, tend to that thirst, before he would go and feed himself. So Maslow took this idea and created his now famous hierarchy of needs. So he started out with the physiological needs of air, water, food, and sex. But he put 5 layers. So there's this physiological needs, the need for safety and security, for loving, belonging, for esteem, and then the need to actualize the self. So the first 4 of those needs he called deficit needs. In other words, if you don't have enough of it, then you're going to put all of your time and energy into making sure those deficit needs are fulfilled before you worry about anything else. So that once you have fulfilled it, then that need ceases to be motivating. So if you're thirsty and you then all you want is water, you don't care about other things, you just want water. Once you get the water and you're no longer thirsty, you're not going to waste any more time looking for water. Number 5, the 5th one is a bit different. He called it a B need. So it's the need for self-actualization, to be all that you can be, fulfill your potential. So if you're looking at this, where would education fit? I'll give you a second. It actually would be in self-actualization. So that means that all of these deficit needs need to be met before the student can actually put a lot of energy into learning. So if they're hungry and they're trying to learn, their body's thinking, I'm hungry, and they're not putting as much energy towards learning. Likewise, if they're being bullied and their safety needs are not being met, then they aren't going to put as much energy into learning as into trying to be safe. All right, so that is Maslow. Let's look at Piaget. So Piaget was around 1896. Again, that's all that time of Darwin. And he studied a psychopathology because his mother had poor mental health. He worked with Théophile Simon and Alfred Binet, who developed the first intelligence test, and what he realized was that a child's mind is not a miniature of adults. So he became interested into why children repeatedly choose the same incorrect answer. So let's say you had a multiple choice test, A, B, C, D. All of the 5-year-olds would get it wrong, but they'd all choose A. All of the 10-year-olds would get it wrong, but they'd all choose C. All of the 12-year-olds would get it wrong, but they'd all choose D. So the idea was that there was something happening. So he considered this in terms of what was going on in the natural world, which was sort of that genetic and the whole idea of genetics and how things that plants adapt to the environment. So he wanted to do sort of like an epistemology, a genetic epistemology, and apply that adaptation to how we think. So he looked at adaptation as 2 different things. There are 2 ways that your brain can adapt. One is assimilation. Something outside your brain fits perfectly into the existing schema. It just moves right in and there's no need to change anything. The other is accommodation. So something you're learning does not at all fit how you conceive of the world. Your schema, your brain, it doesn't fit. So you're going to have to change things in your brain in order for it to fit. Basically, the idea is if something doesn't fit, your mind is going to seek equilibrium. It's going to try to regulate the balance. And it is this work that your own brain does to learn that came with the idea of constructivism. We are not empty vessels. Learners actually construct their own understanding and decide that equilibrium decides what we keep and what we throw out. So Piaget also, in terms of development, talked about 4 stages: a sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. And the idea behind it was if a child is being tested or a child is doing work in a stage that was not their stage, so pre-operational work when they were sensory motor or concrete operational work when they were pre-operational, then that instruction was not developmentally appropriate. So if you've ever heard the term developmentally appropriate education, then you have been influenced by Piaget. So just a brief bit on each of the stages. Sensory motor is where students develop the relationship between their bodies and the environment. They use their senses and their movement to learn about things. They get the idea of a separate self, like they are different from the external world. They understand causality. The best way they actually test this is they will put babies in front of cups where hands move cups across a table, and then all of a sudden the cup will move by itself across the table and the kids will look surprised. And that's when they know that that child has actually developed the concept of causality. At the later stage of sensory motor, they get object permanence, where they realize that an object does not go away simply because it disappears from view. I call it the death of peekaboo. Then you have the pre-operational stage, where students start to use symbols to represent objects. They understand the word apple with no real apple there, but they only learn through concrete evidence. They don't understand other people's perspectives. They exhibit egocentric thought and language, and they lack the concept of conservation. So one of the ways that I would always explain this to students is, if you have, I would take my first graders and I would put 5 cubes in one hand, and I would say, count the cubes. And they would count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would tip one over into the other hand, and I'd show them both hands. I'd be like, count the cubes. And they would count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would tip another one over right in front of them, not changing how many cubes there are, and ask them to count the cubes. So if the student just looked at me and said, 5, then I knew that they're starting to develop conservation. But if I continue to do this and the child keeps counting the cubes, then they don't have conservation. They also lack the concept of reversibility. All right, concrete operational. This is many adults are right here at this stage, concrete operational stage. You can reason logically, you can organize your thoughts coherently, you can think about things, but it's very hard to think about abstract only. You need some sort of concrete physical link. This stage is characterized by the loss of egocentric thought. So this is why kids will go into cliques a lot of times, because they realize that not everyone thinks like them, so they want to get together with a group of people who they think most closely resemble how they think. They have all of the things like conservation, reversibility, seriation, transitivity, class inclusion. They can do basically everything, but it has to be linked to something concrete. And then the final one is the formal operational stage. They believe that many people never reach this stage. It's characterized by understanding how to formulate hypotheses and systematically test them. They're able to think of the form and structure of mathematical problems. So this is the stage where you're going to find your scientists and your mathematicians. Stage movement would be maturation, experience, social interaction, and their own brain's equilibration will create stage movement from one stage to another. So back to that memory castle that we talked about in the introductory video. When Taylor and I were working on this first part, we said, okay, well, where are we going to put Maslow and Piaget? So we put Maslow at the very beginning when you open the door, because we think of the home as being someplace where you have food, where you have water, and where you have shelter. So it's sort of the base of the whole pyramid. So we put it right at the beginning. We put Piaget in the kitchen, because that's where you're going to construct food. So that's the constructivism that Piaget talks about. And then around the table, we put the different stages. The baby who has the cup, because they're moving the cup for causation. On the right-hand side, you can't see it very well because it's a picture, but it's actually a 5 with the little cubes on it to remember that conservation is how you know that they're no longer in the pre-operational stage. The one closest to the bottom chair is actually an abstract drawing with a big X in it, because they can't have abstract. And the stars has to do with like rocket science. So you can do formal observation. You can do formal operational if you can do rocket science. So the next one we have is Vygotsky. Vygotsky was born around the same time as Piaget. Start of the 20th century, Belarusi, Soviet Union. So I always think of him as social constructivism, as being able to construct things with the help of your comrade. So if you get the whole Iron Curtain joke there, haha. So he wanted to explain higher psychological functions, and he wanted to talk about how people learn. His big contribution is the zone of proximal development, which is sort of that zone in between the independent level and the frustration level. It's also known as the instructional level. It's where someone who's more capable than them can help them to learn concepts that they're just about to learn, that they're ready to learn. So that's the ZPD. And we have scaffolding down there, but that's another one that we're going to get to, and that's someone else who talked about scaffolding, which is the supports that we give them within that zone. We'll come back to that. All right, Bandura and Bruner. So Bandura has a social learning theory that says that we can learn by watching others like us learn, that vicarious learning. He did his studies on patients with snake phobias, and they would watch former ophiophobes, which is people who are scared of snakes, handling snakes. So it was people just like them who are actually handling snakes, and that actually helped the current ophiophobes to get over their snake phobia, much more so than watching a video or watching someone else who has no fear of snakes handling snakes. The other person we have here is Jerome Bruner. This is going to go back to Vygotsky's ZPD. Scaffolding is a term that Bruner coined and is basically how we support students who have not quite learned something. So it's what you're going to do in that ZPD to help a student to learn. He, unlike Piaget, felt that you can actually speed up students' development, that it is not something that's sort of set in stone and everything has to be developmentally appropriate. He said using a spiral curriculum, you could build increasingly complex concepts into students' minds so that they can understand bigger things. So if you're looking at the memory castle, we sort of group these three all together. So you have Vygotsky with his social constructivism. You have the two people over here. Let me see if I'll do it. Two people over here who are, one is more capable and is helping them to learn in the ZPD. We also have Bruner, and Bruner is represented by the staircase, which is the scaffold that helps them to go through the ZPD. And then the spiral curriculum is speeding things up towards the more complex concepts. So that's Bruner. Over here we have Bandura with the vicarious learning. Over here they're watching someone learning something. And that is what we had for that memory castle. Have just a few minutes left, so we're just going to go over Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to show you how we put them in our memory castle. Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development, Dewey and Skinner. This is the memory castle we use for that. And actually we have a few people here. So here down the middle in our hallway, we actually put Bloom's taxonomy. So we have creativity, evaluation, synthesis, analysis, application, comprehension, and knowledge. And over here we created a mnemonic to help us remember it. Constructing every student as a creative kid. And that was the mnemonic that we used to remember Bloom's. We have all of the psychologists over here in the Parents Master Suite, because everyone blames the parent. And so we have the ones that are very similar. Skinner, Watson, and Thorndike are all in the whole behaviorism realm, and Jones as well. So they're all over here. Here we have the stages. Oops, went one too many. Erikson's stages, Kohnberg's stages, so that you can kind of see how they're different. On this side, we have the closet where Dewey is, because you're always discovering something in the closet, because Dewey does discovery learning. And then in the bathroom, the hall bathroom, we have Tomlinson's differentiation, because this room is used to meet everyone's needs. So it's flexible grouping, homogeneous mixed group, interest grouping, tiered learning with high, medium, and low. So that's basically how we are formulating the memory castle in student learning. There is